Hi, welcome to this video about ASHIKO, a quad stereo or dual mono VCA with a lot of interesting features. ASHIKO has 4 signal inputs, 8 outputs. They're paired, so the first, second, third and fourth channel. And then there's 1 modulator input for every channel. There's these switches. When I just look at the first channel, the bottom switch switches between stereo operation in the upper setting and dual mono operation in the lower setting. The top switch gives us the choice of having a soft transition or a hard transition, which is possible when you flick this switch into the stereo position and you send in a bipolar CV signal. I will show you all of this in more detail later in the video. The inputs are normalized to each other, which means if you send in a signal into the first input, you can of course extract it from the outputs depending on which mode you're in, but you will also be able to extract it from the outputs of the channels below. To break the normalization, of course, you connect something to one of the other inputs. The normalization is always to the channel above it. The modulator inputs, these are the inputs that you send CV into, and these can be bipolar CV signals like an LFO. These are normalized to each other as well in the same way as the inputs. So what this means is if you connect a modulator to the first modulator input and you don't connect anything to the other modulator inputs, the signal you are sending into the first modulator input will be used to modulate all the other channels. I want to thank Federico from Jolin for sending me this and other units. It's my goal to explore the Jolin modules in a less noisy or destructive setting, as I usually don't make noise or heavily distorted music, and we both thought it was a good idea that I would try to demonstrate how the Jolin modules behave in another context. So let's listen to some patches I made, and after that I will demonstrate to you in a more methodical way what ASHIKO does to a sound, what the inputs, outputs do, and how these switches actually influence the behavior of ASHIKO. To understand the operation of Ashiko, I think it's best to listen and look at the scope at the same time. I will be using the blue cables and the blue trace as my input signal, and the red and the black cable that are connected to the outputs of the first channel are routed through data. You can see that the red cable is actually the yellow trace, and these signals are panned left and right on my mixer according to their position here. So this cable is going to your right ear and this cable is going to your left ear. Let me explain the position of the switches. The top switch is up, which is the soft transition setting, and the bottom switch is down, which means we're in the dual mono mode. And to show you what all of this means, I will send an LFO, which we can see as the green trace here, into the modulator input of the first channel of Ashiko. So please keep in mind we're in the dual mono setting. And let me turn on the 0 axis for the modulator. And this way you can see that when we're in the dual mono setting of Ashiko, the VCA closes when the modulator is negative. Let me zoom in a little bit. And perhaps it's a little bit hard to see, but the VCA actually needs a little bit of a negative signal to completely close down. Let me send in a strictly positive cycling envelope coming from delta V. And you can see with a strictly positive modulator, the VCA inside Ashiko never completely closes down. So we're back to modulating Ashiko with a bipolar LFO. Now let me switch into the hard setting. And now you can see that the transition of the VCA being closed and being open is much more abrupt. You can hear the difference very good as well. Let me go back to the soft setting. And the hard setting. So let me switch this back to the soft setting. And let's now have a listen at, for me, the most exciting feature about Ashiko. The mono to stereo auto panning VCA. And unless you're listening to this on a mono device, you should be able to actually hear that the sound switches from the left to the right. And this is what Federico means when he says this is a seesaw VCA. Let's switch to the hard setting. And just as in dual mono mode, you can clearly hear that the transition between the sound being panned to the left and panned to the right is much more abrupt. Let me change my modulator here to a sample and hold wave. Let's increase the speed. And you can clearly see and hear that while we're in the hard setting, the outputs are really either on or off. But this changes when I switch to the soft setting. And now you can hear there is some overlap when the CV going in is closer to 0. Now this modulator can go up into audio rates. Let's zoom in. And I think this is really interesting as well. You can't really use ASHIKO as a ring modulator, but you can do things like this which make me very happy. Let's briefly have a listen in the hard setting. Let's change the speed of the modulator. I think this is really interesting for sound design. You just send in one sound, in this case some kind of mix between a saw wave and a sine wave, and you get this interesting moving sound out of it. Let's briefly listen to how this sounds with a chaotic modulator. I'm just using orbit 3 for this. Let's switch to audio rates. Let's go back to the soft setting on ASHIKO. Let's switch orbit 3 to LFO speeds, so much slower. The signal coming in with this blue cable here, it's not going through data. Let me switch this off. So the signal coming in here are some chords coming from the 4MS ensemble oscillator. To be clear, there's nothing connected to the modulator input of any of the channels. Let's listen to the outputs of the second channel. You can hear that the chords are present there as well. And I can go on to the third channel. And you can see when the switches are in different positions, these behave differently. So to show you how you can utilize these in different settings, let me connect this to the first channel again, and let's just connect an LFO coming from KitGood here. Is this the right channel? Yes, it is. So this is a slow triangle LFO. And let me route it into the first modulator input on ASHIKO. And since this switch is in the down position, we're in the dual mono mode. And any negative CV will close down the VCAs for both of these outputs. And as I showed you a minute ago, switching this one to stereo changes the behavior of ASHIKO to being something more similar to an auto panner. Now let's listen to what the second channel is outputting. And as you can see and hear, the second channel on ASHIKO is processing the signal that we are sending into the first channel's input here. It's using the modulator that we're sending into the first channel, but it's in dual mono mode, so it closes down both outputs. But we can switch this to being in the stereo operation modus as well. You can choose a hard or soft setting there. The settings of the channels above have no influence. It's only the inputs and the modulators that are normalized. And the same goes for the third or the fourth. Let's listen to the fourth here. So this is exactly the same thing. So let me do something silly here just to prove a point. So the signal is still connected to the first channel's input. The modulator, let me increase the speed here a little bit. So the modulator is connected to the first channel as well. Let me now use 2 more cables to connect the outputs of the third channel to my mixer as well. I'm not going to send this through data. So the red one is also panned to the right and the black one is panned to the left. So of course this is a little bit silly because now we're just hearing the same sound twice. But what I can do is just use another modulator for this channel. And if I now mute these outputs, let's increase and to perhaps make things even more confusing, let's connect the sound I was using before to the input of the fourth channel. And if we now listen to those outputs, you can hear that we are hearing just the mix of the sine and the saw wave modulated in stereo by the modulator that we're sending in to the third channel. If I remove this modulator, the fourth channel uses the modulator that we're sending in here. So all the normalizations on ASHIKO go up, which means that if something is connected to the channel above it, or the one above it, or the one above it, it will look at that. If we connect anything else, this breaks the normalization. And I hope by showing you this confusing stuff that you realize that all these normalizations are really interesting. And you can do a lot with just a few signals. Now let me show you one special use. Well, it's not really a special use, but it was something that I had to think about for a minute. When I have a stereo signal, and I had to re-record this segment because apparently I got completely confused myself. So this actually proves to me that it's a good thing to show you. So to go over it again, I'm sending in a signal that's already stereo. Let's just listen to it by itself. This is Odessa going straight into my mixer, and there's some modulation to the parameters which causes it to move slightly around in the stereo field. And to use the auto panning feature of ASHIKO with a stereo sound, you simply connect one side of your sound, in this case the right side, to one channel of ASHIKO and the other side of your sound to another channel of ASHIKO. And then you connect the first output of the first channel to one side on your mixer. And then you connect not the corresponding output, but the other output of the other channel to the other output of your mixer. And if you then connect a modulator to this, currently, because these switches are in the down position, all of the outputs close when the signal we're sending into the modulator input is negative. But when we switch these into stereo operation, you can see that we are auto panning a stereo sound. What I did in my previous recording was I got confused and I connected them both to the same corresponding outputs. And both of the bottom outputs open up when the modulator is negative. And of course, if you want that auto panning feature, this doesn't make a lot of sense. You really need to use alternating outputs. And please keep in mind, I'm still using these red and black cables panned to the right and to the left on my mixer. This is all I wanted to show you about ASHIKO. It's not a really complex module, at least as a user it isn't. And I think the stereo auto panning feature is a very powerful feature to have in a modular system. The build quality of these modules is more than adequate. Compared to factory-built heavy-duty aluminum modules, it might look a little bit sketchy. The panel is PCB material, but all the switches and the inputs and the outputs feel sturdy, as they should. You can even see Gitgood here beside ASHIKO. These jacks are soldered on top of the panel, and yeah, these are soldered really sturdily in place. So I don't have any complaints about the build quality, especially considering that Federico builds these at home. Thank you very much for watching this video about ASHIKO by Jolin. I hope you learned something. See you next time. Bye.